Good morning. It's Monday. It's been a crazy 10 days in the markets and also in developments around AI. Today, we are honored to have a new special guest, Cern Basher. Cern is a legend. We've done tons of videos together over the years, and he's one of the few people that really gets deep into things like Bitcoin, MicroStrategy, AI, Tesla, robotics, etc. Cern, good morning. Thank you for joining us here. How are you this fine day?
I am well, thanks. Thanks for having me here. I'm humbled to be part of this group. You guys are the experts in so many things, so I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
The pleasure is all ours. Believe me. And of course, Mando, new haircut, looking great, looking smooth.
Yeah, gone for height. I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I'm traveling, so I'm sorry if my audio is not as good as it sometimes is. But yeah, market all-time highs throughout the board. I actually wasn't expecting it. I honestly wasn't expecting it after last week. I thought we were in for a bit more of a chop period. Maybe we'd only really break through all-time high when we headed towards a rate cut in September or just before that. But this is the thing, like as you always say, risk happens fast in crypto. If you didn't catch it, it's very tough to chase it when it just keeps on going.
Exactly. We were very bullish, but maybe weren't expecting even that much action to happen last week. CTO, what about you? I mean, we hit 123,800 in some exchanges yesterday. Bitcoin currently is taking a little dip down to 121K, but that's what it is. There you go.
We have to celebrate the all-time high. Amazing. I'm doing incredible. So congrats, everyone. Thanks, everyone who has been following us all these years. And yeah, some celebration is due. So, whip out your...
Did you buy that specially, or was that you just had that in the back?
No, I bought it especially for today's stream. And I bought it in gold color.
Awesome. Well, let's get into the story. We have a lot to cover. And this one is really about kind of what we try and talk about on the channel is try play where the puck is going to be. The world is changing extremely fast, and we learned that over the last week or so. And not only the price action and things like Bitcoin going from low 100s to 123,000 in a very short window of time, but we've also seen breakthroughs happening on the ASI side. And today is going to be a little bit different because we are going to mine Cern's mind. And before I jump in, links below for everybody, and we're all streaming on everybody's channels as well, but links for Mando and his newsletter are below. Cern, his ex, and maybe we should add his wife's comedy music channel as well. And of course, CTO Larsson, all the links are below. And of course, wherever you're streaming, we don't care. And big thank you to moderators in the chat. But let's get into it. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. Let's talk about the macro markets first. Why is this all happening so fast? Bitcoin is rising up in a straight line. Bitcoin has broken out from a historic 10-year chart. And maybe you can pull up a chart later, CTO, as to how, if you look at the monthly, it has actually broken above the trend line, which caught everybody by surprise. It's gone up faster earlier than expected. As Mando said, we were expecting September for it to kick off with rate cuts. It's preempted that strike somehow. Also, yields are rising in a straight line. Nobody wants to buy treasuries. Okay, you know that better than anybody else from your bond market experience, Mando. Dollar is falling in a straight line, and gold prices, I wouldn't say rising in a straight line, but they had the best year ever in like 20 years. And what's going on exactly? Like, we saw some interesting things. The Europeans and the British were complaining, we don't have an all-time high in Bitcoin. Well, that was last week because the dollar is so weak, but it's because US deficit spending is out of control. And one thing I do want to touch on, though, people talk about US deficit spending because all of that data is very public and people talk about it. But I guarantee you, other nations are in the exact same boat, everybody. This is not specific to the US. This is happening in New Zealand. This is happening in Australia. This is happening across Europe, South America, you name it. I'm going to kick this one to you first. Cern, what's your view of macro and markets, and what type of pickle are we in?
Oh, we're in bad shape. It's horrendous, and I think that Elon and others have tried to draw as much attention to this as possible. Where we get focused on the political battles between Elon and Trump and everything that's going on, but the reality is that if we don't get our spending under control, we're in for a world of hurt. And I think we're seeing the Bitcoin market particularly react to this, and that's certainly helped, driving up the price of Bitcoin at this point. The other thing I would say too is that with the advent of the Bitcoin ETF, a year and a half ago now, it's taken a lot of money managers, wealth managers, that kind of time to get around to the idea of even allocating capital to Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ETF. So we're starting to see that slow sort of rush of money from an action that happened a year and a half ago. Right. It takes investment committees in some institutions a long time to make decisions. And so we're starting to see that push of funds, towards Bitcoin and gold as well, of course. But if we don't get our fiscal situation under control sooner rather than later, we're in for a world of hurt. The good news is that that's only positive for Bitcoin.
Yeah. And people with hard assets as well, they'll survive the collapsing matrix. CTO, what do you make of the macro situation? And is it the actual cause? Like the ETF angle is very important. I watch ETF action every single day and have done so for a year and a half now. What do you think is driving the price up? And do you want to look at the chart?
Yeah, I mean, we speculated about it here many times, and I still think the same. I think there are two components, two types of buyers. There is the speculative buyer where we see Bitcoin as like a tech stock of some kind. But I do think the other part has come in as well, where it starts to seem frightening a little bit with the bonds and the traditional finance, where Bitcoin, for the first time, I think we're getting like a pinch of this actual digital gold, that it starts seeming like a safer asset. And I think we're having both those categories now, which is a little bit new because we could see it in the chart earlier, right? We could see that Bitcoin basically tracked the tech stocks for the longest time. And now I think we're seeing some other price action as well. But let's look at the facts. So I will show three perspectives. One on the shorter term. We had this flag. It broke out. Here was it last Thursday. And boom, we went up and basically completed this pattern. I said last Friday, I had actually readiness that we could go back up a little bit more before the breakout. And my plan was to increase leverage down to maybe 90K, but we didn't get it. We just broke out and boom, up we went. So it is absolutely fantastic. But then I want to show two little bit longer term perspectives, because the previous view was a month or two. Here is about half a year. So here we have completed another inverse head and shoulder. And if you're friends of this channel, you know that that's a bullish chart construction, and it gets a pattern pretty high up here. And the third one is an even longer perspective where we zoom out all the way to 2021. So this is about 3.5 years. And no, it's even more. It's 4.5 years. And here we have also a bigger completed inverse head and shoulders that retested during the spring 2025. And this is also intact. And the retest here was perfect. So both on like the 1 month perspective, 6 months perspective, 4 years perspective, we're having incredibly bullish chart setups here. And the trend is up on basically every time frame. On daily time frame, you switch to weekly, it's up. And any other time frame you can choose. So it is a very, very positive setup here. And perhaps we start seeing this, that there's a new type of buyers coming in here that's buying for another reason.
Yeah. And in fact, all the stuff that you mentioned there could point to a mini super cycle in the making. Not saying this year, but soon in the future. Mando, between all of this that we've just heard from CERN and CTO and the global M2 going through the roof, China printing like there's no tomorrow to get themselves out of a hole, what do you make of all of this? And are we going to follow that global M2 cycle up to 160K?
Yeah, well, the correlation did come back just at the right time, right? It was starting to decorrelate slightly, and then it's moved back up. I think I agree with all the stuff that's been said. It feels like the tailwinds for Bitcoin particularly, and probably the rest of crypto are very, very strong right now. The only thing you'd be worried about is if something breaks. So, rising bond yields, yeah, they do signal a lack of faith, perhaps in like fiscal austerity, or maybe just a lack of belief in the ability of the creditworthiness of some of these institutions. But if that was to spiral, like if Japan was to spiral, I do think it could take down a few different people. So that's the only thing I'm really worried about right now. Is just like, is there a solvency or liquidity event coming in any sort of one of these pockets? Potentially in some bits of Japan there is, like we've spoken about before, some of the insurers, some of the banks. Knowing that country, they would probably look to contain it as much as they could. So I don't know. Like rising bond yields is good until it's not. Let's put it that way. Like it signals risk on until suddenly it's very risk off and something breaks. You're starting to see some cracks in the US housing market, but it feels like a slower moving beast. So for now, I'm pretty bullish. But you just got to be wary that one of these days something could break and then everything just collapses. And we've tended to see that even though Bitcoin bounces back very, very strongly from those sort of events, it does tend to correlate with them on the day of or in the days of the events. So that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, in fact, you mentioned the U.S. housing market. A couple of things that are happening is the question that everybody's asking is, why are we beholden to Jerome Powell and this independent, weird faculty that just are hammering commercial real estate, housing markets, small businesses that need to borrow money? I can't tell you the number of calls I've had with people that are looking for liquidity because they can't get any money from their banks right now. But this is kind of a picture of the future, which I want us to think about is, what will 2030 look like? I think a lot. I think in terms of 5-year cycles. What do the next 5 years look like? How do we position ourselves for that? We know AI is in a super cycle. It is bonkers what's happening in AI, and I bore people to death talking about it. And also Bitcoin is the only global money that can support all of this. And everything is transforming. We're seeing the tokenization of the world, real world assets, etc. And then we have politics, and people say, don't talk politics, but you cannot not talk markets and politics because they're inextricably linked. And of course, we heard last week, the America Party will embrace Bitcoin. Fiat is hopeless. So yes, Elon Musk says. And then we have this, which I thought was the funniest thing I ever read on Sunday. Vitalik says we need to slow down super intelligent AI to reduce risk. Giving our civilization more time to prepare is good. I mean, ASI, as far as I'm concerned, arrived last week with Grok 4. I'm going to kick this to you first, Cern, too, because I find this, it ties into our worlds. We've got ahead of the number 2 crypto freaking out about AI. He wants the world to slow down. Of course, it's not going to. It's only going to accelerate from here. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But what would you say to this? And well,
there's so many different elements to this, isn't there? Because while we may want to slow this down just to make ourselves feel a little better so we can adjust to it, the reality is that it's not slowing down. In fact, it's probably accelerating. And also there's a reality of, if we don't, then somebody else will.
Yes. And
do you want to give up the advantage that we may have in this space to the Chinese or some other country? The answer is a clear no. And so, this sentiment, I think we're going to see from a lot of people, and particularly we're probably going to see it from a lot of politicians. And so we get into what could be a very dangerous area where, for political reasons, we're trying to slow things down or trying to protect certain parties, particularly when people start to lose their jobs. We're going to see the political side of this rear its ugly head, and we're going to see some disastrous policies put in place in the name of trying to protect people's jobs and incomes. Yeah. So that's where it gets really dangerous, in my opinion. Ultimately, we want to get through this as quickly as we can to the other side, which is a world of abundance. And we need a lot of intelligent AIs to do that, to get there.
Do you believe in that abundance story? Because for the world to be abundant, you need global UBI, but aren't people who are positioned for this AI super cycle, aren't they going to have the most? Or are they just going to give all their wealth away, or will it be taxed away by nations and then redistributed in the UBI format? So this whole story of global abundance, I've never seen it happen in my life. I still believe there will be wealth concentration.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it? It's it's easier for me to see the distant future than the near future. So in the distant future, we have, energy costs that trend towards zero. We have intelligence costs that trend towards zero. We have transportation costs that trends towards zero. We have the cost of growing food trending towards zero. So in that world, you could imagine an abundance of all those things where the marginal cost is almost nothing. And so in theory, we should be able to get there. The question is then, how do we implement that? Investors, for example, in Tesla want to earn a return on their investment. They don't want to just give those returns away to the rest of the world. So that there's going to have to be some balance, some reckoning in terms of how we deal with all that. But at least in theory, we should not have a lack of supply of really anything, with the exception perhaps of scarce things like, even land is not that scarce. Even land, we can make more land, right? We've already built islands in many places. And so this notion of scarcity that our economy sort of operates on starts to go away very quickly, and it's going to change the economic nature of almost everything.
Yeah, interesting. And we can also build up and down too, underground tunnels, as is the plan for Mars. CTO, how does this dovetail into your era digitalis?
Yeah, I just thought it was very interesting what you said here, Søren. And I mean, in a way, we kind of have experienced that a little bit, like comparing 100 years back. If you say that it's easier to look in the distant future, if you look at, I don't know, my home country, Sweden, it was a very poor country in the 1800s. People were starving to death because they didn't have enough potatoes. If you look at the world today, there is enough potatoes or rice for the vast majority of people. We have more problems with obesity today and so on. So in a way, that has happened. And it's easy to see. And healthcare is another, if looking at multi-100-year cycles, if you were the king of Sweden, your children still died in childbirth, or child mortality was sky high in all the countries of the world, and it has trended down dramatically over the past 100 years or so. So in a way, healthcare also has gotten cheaper and more abundant, and it's easy to see that how that trend could continue. I still think that the differences are going to get bigger in a way that, as a result, I'll talk about the era digitalis also, but I think just as the inherent leverage gets easier, some people have more leverage and they're going to get enormous returns in the digital world, and some other people will find it harder, I think, to contribute in this workplace, and the differences will expand. And then, of course, countries will try to even that out, but I think it will be hard to do because countries can also compete with each other. So people can, if it gets like too high tax burden in one place, they will move somewhere else. And I think it's a very interesting to see. How do you see that? Do you think differences will get bigger?
I think initially they will. And I think that's where the political risk comes in, because the people that are on the losing end of things, or perceiving that they're on the losing end of things, will advocate for political changes that may not be the best for the overall long-term development of it. Right. The idea of protecting certain jobs, right? You're going to have autonomous vehicles take away millions of truck drivers' jobs, for example, taxi drivers, Uber drivers. There's going to be some political force at work to try to preserve that. And ultimately, we don't really want that as a society. Those are not the kinds of jobs that we should be preserving. No. We need to, on the other hand, make sure that people can live. And that's the key issue, not necessarily their job.
We had an old technology visionary in Sweden many years ago, Jan Stenbeck, who said that you cannot stop technology, which it seems like Vitalik hasn't really understood. At best, the politicians can slow it down. That's the just like you said, sir, that they perhaps can postpone it a little bit, but it's going to happen anyway. There's no way to save those truck driver jobs long term, but perhaps they can extend it 5 years if they get enough subsidies from the truck driver association. But if we go back to what I feel, I thought about this some years ago, and I feel that there's a lot of things happening that are not happening only in isolation. They give synergy to each other, which further boost this thing. The first point is that we do live more digitally, and it was accelerated by COVID. Maybe in crypto, we started living digitally a few years before that. We all felt that we are living in this digital space, but I think the rest of the world started living more digitally during COVID, which then makes the other points more relevant. The second point on digital ownership, which enabled the technology that enabled cryptocurrencies, enable other form of digital ownership as well, which makes it more relevant because we're living more in the digital world. The third one is peer-to-peer media, which enable these trends to take off. I think that if media had been mainstream controlled, I don't think Bitcoin would have been where it is today, for example. It is because some out of place people can actually get a voice today that are enabling much of this. Then we have, of course, artificial intelligence. No one has missed that. Then we have global protocols also, which is another thing that further accelerate that. Like if you look at the application layer, like the YouTube, Google, and so on, it got segregated. China is not using Google, but Bitcoin is used globally. Telecom protocols are used globally. It's the same 5G and wherever you go in the world. So we're having this trend of global protocols that further make them more impactful, because of course if everything is chopped up, it has less impact. But when there are global protocols, it has bigger impact. Then there are the other two here at the bottom hasn't really even started yet. We're not sitting here with VR headsets today, but in the future, I do think this technology will make the digital lifestyle even more immersive, and the relevance of digital ownership, the peer-to-peer media, the AI, and the global protocols even more impactful. And the last one, number 7, brain links, which is maybe the one furthest ahead, but that will also, I think, have enormous impact. Like Elon explained there, that means that if I'm hooked up with some brain link, I'm not only hooked up to a computer, but I'm also hooked up to all other brains that's also hooked up to that computer. So we kind of become some sort of, multi-cyborg here, all of us. And that's maybe furthest ahead. But between each of these 7 points, there are synergies. And together, they are creating enormous change that I think most people haven't realized how profound impact this will have. But I think it will be as big as we go back and look at Sweden in 1800 as like a farmer standing there in the snow trying to dig up potatoes and trying to survive. And children are starving. And then today we're sitting here in some kind of society and trying to understand what is changing. But I think the change that is coming is as big as from that time until today. And I think it will happen much faster than maybe any of us realize here. I think we were all shocked by the speed of the Bitcoin breakout and the speed of the AI releases coming out, how much better they are gotten than just 2 years ago. It's incredible. So this is accelerating. I think it will happen faster than
Mando, how crazy are we with all this talk of the future and the past and everything else you heard?
Well, I think I like what CERN said in that I think it's very difficult to predict. I think the level of the range of outcomes can be very, very high. Because when I look through even what this can do to different industries and people, I think it can have a broad range of impact. Like do you think that this is going to lead to more or less monopoly power from organizations? Like what we're seeing right now is like a lot of the tech firms are reaching for paying huge sums, for like top AI talent. Arguably, this technology levels the playing fields in many different ways. It allows organizations to become smaller. It means that, you potentially could start a business which originally would need 10 different people. AI levels the playing fields for a lot of that sort of stuff. So I wonder what this means for just like capitalism in general, and the formation of organizations. Does this lead to more or less strength? And like we've spoken about some concepts like UBI and abundance, and there's some parts of this which make you feel like we might go down more of like a socialism sort of route where everyone has everything and like there's no need for even a desire to like reach for certain I don't know, aims of capitalism, right? But on the other end, you feel like this could allow the people who are smart enough with the technology to push ahead. So this is why I kind of feel like I get caught up in like I don't really know where this is going to be right now.
Yeah.
I think the simplest trade for me has always just been that uncertainty will lead to a demand for assets which go up when there's high amounts of uncertainty. So that's why I think things like Bitcoin and gold are probably good purchases right now. But when the barriers to entry are being cut for every major business, and at the same time you feel like some of the monopoly power might still be there with close-end systems, but then you have it's just very difficult to judge. So yeah, my investment thesis around this is I kind of go back and forth on like what this is going to do to industries, what this is going to do to companies, and what this is going to do to politics as well. I think whenever it veers either way, you're going to see politics come in to try and stop that, basically.
Yep. Well, you mentioned two things there, Amanda, that are very interesting. One is what's happening with AI and governments and nations. I call it an AI arms race. And we hinted at that at the beginning. Either if you're not first, you're last, which means China will take over the world. It's that simple. And then the second thing is what happens to money and the future. And I always talk about this common term called UBI Nation. If you go to Twitter and you search UBI Nation, you'll see me talking about this 100 times, maybe more. And the fact is, with an aging population and more socialism, Marxism, half the population will depend on the governments for their handouts, whether it's medical care or other type of social services or welfare or free housing or food stamps or whatever. We're already beyond the tipping point in many countries, as far as I'm concerned. And that is alarming. And this takes us to this and back to how do we protect ourselves in the future? And I, since the very beginning, I spoke about these two things, which represent my positioning to protect myself. And CERN, you do too. Walk us through this and help us understand exactly what you're trying to say here.
Yeah, there's more to it than this, but this is kind of a simplified version of this. And I see Tesla and Bitcoin as a symbiotic relationship. And Tesla really here is a proxy for AI and robotics, right? And so there are other players as well, but Tesla's a good example. So as we have autonomy and robotics, becoming part of our economy, it will unleash massive deflation on the economy, right? It's going to drive down the cost of transportation, drive down the cost of labor, drive down the cost of intelligence. The problem with that is if you're a nation state or anybody that has a bunch of debt, that deflation increases the real burden of that debt, right? So one tempting solution for governments and their go-to way of dealing with this is just to print money to deal with this, just to offset the deflation by inflating and printing money. Unfortunately, that erodes the value of that fiat money that much faster, and it's going to drive capital to Bitcoin. We've already seen that now. It's happening as we speak. And so this is now a cycle then that could just accelerate and feed on itself. Now, there's more to this. I think to CTO's point about the global protocol, right? Bitcoin, we should not forget, is kind of at its most basic level, a global security protocol. And because Bitcoin is so secure, it happens to be a great form of money, happens to be a great form of capital, and whatever else we can use it for. That at its fundamental core, I think, is allowing for this, right? The other thing too, just before we leave this, Mando, one thing that you said sort of relates to sort of how capitalism is going to deal with this. I think we already have some examples. Think about the global telecommunication business. It used to be when you made a phone call, they measured how long you spoke for and they charged you based on the number of minutes. We got to the point now where we don't even track that. It's too cheap to meter. So what happens in a world where transportation is too cheap to meter? It's just a flat cost, however far you want to go. What happens if intelligence is too cheap to meter? Right? All these things, even food, at some point, it's just too cheap. Just walk into the store and grab as many oranges as you want. It's so cheap to make them. Don't even worry about paying. I think that's the kind of abundance I think that we're potentially headed for in lots of different areas. Does that fundamentally change capitalism? I think in many ways it does, but I think you can still have a capitalistic system on top of that for things that still aren't too cheap to meter. But a lot of the things I think that people will need to live on become too cheap to pay for. Just don't even bother. So that's sort of how I'm seeing that, and we've sort of again seen that in the telecommunications market and internet services and so on. You just pay a flat fee and you get as much as you want.
Wow.
So it means people just go to a subscription model for food.
Yep,
Something like that.
I think so. Subscription model for transportation, subscription model for intelligence. Yep.
Yeah,
And it's funny because this ties very much into socialism. We saw the mayoral candidate of New York City. He wants to own grocery stores, so people can walk in and get their oranges for free and everything else. Confiscate housing from the wealthy and give it away. So where's the breakdown between these two that you're talking about, Søren? How they say that a human, and I've witnessed it too, when a human has nothing to live for, particularly males, they become very dangerous.
Well, I think the answer is that the state doesn't need to be the answer to supply the food, right? Just like with telecommunications, the state hasn't gotten involved and demanded that telecom companies charge by subscription. They've just done it because it's so cheap that it doesn't make sense to meter it anymore. The competitive forces have sort of pushed that. So the better role for the state is to foster the development of these technologies and create an environment where these companies can prosper so that they can drive down the cost of all these goods and services. And it will happen naturally, right? We've seen Tesla roll out the robotaxi service. Initially, $4.20 per ride, no matter how far you're going. Now, we don't know whether that kind of pricing mechanism will stick, but I think that's a sign of the future where you're not necessarily going to be charged per mile because it's going to be too cheap. And in fact, eventually, I think robotaxi rides will be free because there's other services that can be layered on top of that essentially render the cost of the service, so cheap it's not even worth charging for.
Yeah, interesting.
I have to say what an incredibly interesting perspective.
Yeah,
thanks for sharing this.
And one thing that I do want everybody to know, that all of the stuff we're talking about is not 10 years into the future. It's coming real fast. We don't know if it's 18 months away or 3 years away or 5 years away, but the world will be a very different place in 2030. Let's do a quick round the table. Who believes the world will be radically different in 2030? Mando, yes or no?
Yeah, I think obviously. I think
Okay.
technology is already causing a huge impact.
Yeah. CTO, radically different world in 5 years?
Yeah, I think so.
Søren?
Without a doubt. I think you go back to Jeff Bezos' famous statement, what won't change is where we should be focusing our time on rather than thinking about what will change, because what won't change, I think, will be less and less as time goes on.
Interesting. Okay, let's get back to crypto because people want to know what the heck is happening. We saw a breakout on the monthly that is strange. Our large drawdowns for Bitcoin over. Is there a chance of a bear market? I always talk about how bear markets are so important because that's when you can make most money buying things cheap. And people are now afraid there will be no bear market, which is a complete mind shift from the past. And then we kick this off that, Søren, you said something very profound, that the RIAs took them 18 months to wrap their head around this new asset class. Now they're coming in, and the amount of money at their fingertips is mind-blowing. Even if they all just do a 2% allocation for the clients they represent, Bitcoin's going straight to $500,000. Easy. And then finally, what's happening with other cryptos? Not only are we seeing things change very fast with AI, we see a lot of dead coins, but we see radical changes. We saw one company raise $400 million in 12 minutes on chain. That, things that are unheard of in the past. So how Mando, how do you wrap your head around all of this? And do you believe bear markets could be a thing of the past, considering the sense of urgency and how the world is changing so fast, and bond market, treasury markets broken, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin dips have just been bought very, very aggressively recently. I think there's two main things which has surprised me about this. Last week we spoke about is it going to be an altcoin season? Normally, when Bitcoin starts breaking through an all-time high, you see a big move in Bitcoin dominance. Like back in November, we went from, I think, 63% down to 55%. Bitcoin dominance has barely budged. It's gone from 65% to like 64.5%. It's not really moved. It's been a mini alt season, and obviously some things have moved up higher, but like on a broad level, Bitcoin has remained very, very strong relative to the rest of the market throughout this whole period, which tells me that it is largely these treasury companies, which I think has been the main drivers, and probably like some of the TradFi rails around like the ETFs and other long-term bars that we've been talking about. That as a narrative is still a very, very strong narrative in crypto, and probably driving it, maybe even more than use case of the chain. You've seen certain L1s keep pace, others haven't. It's been a mixed bag, I think, when it comes to altcoins. Like Hyperliquid's been strong, ETH's been relatively strong, Sui had a strong day today, but other than that, it's like it's mixed. I do think that this is going to be the medium term trend here, though. This treasury companies are coming in and buying crypto and not just Bitcoin feels like something that's going to continue now for the next number of months. I don't think that's something that's just going to stop now. It's now moved slightly more towards ETH, and I think you'll see it move aggressively towards Solana as well. I just think that this is going to be kind of a trend now, which is going to drive up some of those major L1s.
Yeah, and you're seeing that here as well, Amanda. What you said, the move to Altseason, like it just shot straight up vertical to 47, which is a little bit unusual of a move.
Yeah, look, like I just look at Bitcoin dominance, and I just think that 64.5, it moved 0.5%. It's barely moved. That's crazy for me. Like normally when Bitcoin breaks through all-time highs, everyone's like reaching for risk whenever they can, and it kind of caught people off guard, I think, a little bit here. I mean, we even said that we didn't know. It was kind of in this will it, won't it for the last few weeks. But even then, it feels like Bitcoin and maybe ETH and a couple of other ones have been strong, but it still feels like that is the biggest narrative, and that probably points to what we've been speaking about before. Like, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. It doesn't necessarily feel like bond yields breaking through 30-year highs is necessarily an environment where you want to buy like the riskiest bit of global markets. You kind of want to still have the safe haven of a Bitcoin or a gold there. So I think Bitcoin dominance stays high during this period, even throughout the summer as we hit new all-time highs.
And that takes us to the key thing that I look at is the total crypto market cap. So if Bitcoin dominance stays high, but then we see a spike like we just saw on the alts beginning to run for the first time. I saw Solana finish its second bear market this morning in a long time. But now we have this breaking news, by the way, for those Palantir fans. What about this? I don't know if this is true from Prince of Egypt or Prince Ogit, but Elon Musk XAI announces Grok for government and U.S. Department of Defense contract. That's Palantir's home base. Søren, I saw you nod at this. Is this true?
I don't know about this specifically. It wouldn't surprise me. It's a sign, certainly, of things to come. We need to realize that all these technologies, AI, robotics, are all weapon systems.
Yep.
Bitcoin, by the way, is also a weapon system.
Yep.
And so it needs to be treated as such by the government, and they need to stay on top of this. And so it would not surprise me, as you mentioned, James, that, Grok is now such an impressive AI model. It would be very smart for the U.S. government to make sure that they are, staying abreast of this and investing, essentially.
Yeah. Craziness indeed. So we're seeing lots of other stuff happening, but let's try and get back to the agenda because we still have a lot of ground to cover. And thank you for that. Ositio, real quick on you, bear market drawdown, Søren, bear market drawdown. I know, Søren, you've got clients that are exposed to Bitcoin with MicroStrategy, etc. What do you both think? Do you think this is a different era for cycles in Bitcoin and crypto?
Do you want to go first?
CTO,
sure.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't believe for a minute that the era of drawdowns and bear markets are over. I don't subscribe to that. I think that human speculation isn't going anywhere, and it's going to overshoot in both directions. But I mean, perhaps instead of 80-85% drawdowns, perhaps we get 50% drawdowns, more like the the S&P 500 or something like that. But I don't think that so guys, don't do high leverage here, thinking that it can never back up again, because of course it can. But I don't think so. Like looking at the charts right now, there is no indication of that yet. I'm just talking about it in general. Right now, everything looks positive. And then the Altseason, I can cover that also if I can share the chart for a minute.
Yep.
Just to echo a little what Mando said here. So exactly as Mando said here, if looking in some perspective, there's not much of an Altseason here, right? This small movements here. You can barely see it if you zoom out. And if we look at the biggest altcoin, so here is ETH BTC. There was like a bottom pattern in May. We talked about it here several times on the chart. But then the next breakout hasn't happened here. There was no, despite this big breakout in Bitcoin, just as Mando said, this did not break out, at least not yet. So if that will happen, that's still ahead. Same with Sol BTC. Not much happened. BNB BTC, went this way. So overall, except for a few projects that has had huge pumps, overall, it hasn't really started yet. So if there will be an Altseason, that is still ahead from what we can look at here. But of course, there could be some early signs, but it's always very speculative to say that each small move here is the beginning of a bigger trend. That's mostly just guessing. So that's my take on that.
Awesome. Søren, how do you coach your clients if there is a traditional drawdown that can hurt them a lot?
Well, I expect there will be. I think the good news is that the drawdowns over time, as Bitcoin becomes a larger and larger asset, should moderate. And it should be helped by the fact that there's different pools of money coming into this now. So you've got, all the wealth managers, investment managers adding capital to this. You've got the Bitcoin treasury companies. You've got nation states that we're at a different level of adoption now, and the flows to those adoptions, is changing rapidly. It's not just individuals investing money in this. There's some massive pools of capital starting to flow in. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that Bitcoin goes to the moon and stays there. I think there will be some volatility. But I do think that what we're witnessing is a change from what I would have considered to be the world's most risk-on asset to now something that's the exact opposite, and it may now be the world's best risk-off asset. And I don't know, I guess I'd put it to the group is, can you think of any other assets in the world that serve as the least risky asset at the same time as perhaps being one of the most volatile, risky assets? Is there anything that you can think of that fits that bill?
There's nothing as secure and there's nothing as hard. And they are the two things that I really like about Bitcoin. And also the fact that we're very early. I think it was Tom Lee said last week that 95 or 97% of all investors on the planet do not own any Bitcoin. And these are the people with all the money. Forget the population of the world. Think investors. That was very profound in terms of adoption. So I think, we're still early. Mando, agree? Early? Bitcoin? Better asset out there?
Yeah, it's not, take a step back. It's not just Bitcoin running right now. Like silver's hitting its high in 14 years. Platinum just hit its all-time, hit its high in like 15 years. Gold obviously has been hitting all-time highs all years. It feels as though this is a move towards hard assets. We keep on saying this, and Bitcoin is being viewed as a hard asset. Now you might say housing is also a hard asset. I would argue that there's been a lot of leverage in that system, so it's a bit more affected by the rising bond yields. So it feels as though they're taking over as like an asset to own. You ask someone of my generation what they would rather own as a house versus like Bitcoin. I think it's a much more even spread than boomers would expect, because they see how much housing has gone up, and it's a very dangerous market with that much leverage. And then they look at something like Bitcoin and they think, oh, this is actually a better hedge for me. This is like more of my generation.
It was a hilarious meme yesterday I saw. I wish I had it. It was a boomer with no Bitcoin and a house, and a Zoomer with a bunch of Bitcoin. And the boomer says to the Zoomer, "I'll give you my house for Bitcoin." And the Zoomer says, "No." It's just that it was like not interested in real estate at all, which I thought was hilarious.
So I think this is a trend right now, and I think it's again these are medium term trends, and this is why I keep on thinking that Bitcoin stays high. I think the whole of the altcoin cycle is really dependent on this tokenization move, and which is growing, and that's why we're seeing like a little bit of an altcoin season. But there's not a world here where I think Bitcoin isn't leading this market for maybe even the next few years.
Awesome. Let's talk about valuations. Okay. I saw a comment in there saying XLM is pumping, the crypto market is crazy. I've been saying it for a long time that the market is crazy. And I want to pick your brain a little bit here, Søren, too, because we talk about how assets are mispriced in the world. You could argue, we mentioned, Tesla is about to scale Dojo. Okay. They're going to build a better chip, or at least a comparable chip to what NVIDIA have, but it's optimized for training, which is the most important thing. And NVIDIA has a market cap of $2 trillion. Tesla are about to scale their chip. You could argue it's worth at least a market cap of $4 trillion. Tesla could have half that value, but nobody's pricing that in, of course. And then we look at networks and blockchain. You got the legacy networks. You've got XRP trading at a $9 million per user market cap. Ridiculous. ETH just as bad. You have other chains, old chains that do nothing, but people still hold them. And then you got new chains that do, 8,000% more, say DEX volume, 10,000 more users, all that type of percent more users, but they're not priced correctly. Why are things with all the AI we have and everything else? How come nobody knows how to value networks or businesses? Or even look at the most basic data like revenue or users or Metcalfe's law or network effects. And sometimes I just scratch my head and I give up. I throw my hands in the air. Why can the market not price assets?
Yeah, I wish I had all the answers. It is a vexing problem. It's a frustrating one, but it also means there's opportunities for people. I think the markets are not very good at particularly pricing in exponential technologies. Just on the topic of PE ratios, I've actually had numerous discussions with people on X and numerous posts about the problem with PE ratios. So if you think about it, if you live in a linear world and your company is growing at 5 or 10%, then the earnings that you had last year might be indicative of the earnings that you might print next year. So last year's PE might be helpful in valuing the company in terms of what it is going to do this year. In an exponential world, that doesn't work because the value of the company in year 2, 3, 4, and 5 is so, the revenues and the earnings of that business in those out years are so much greater than where the companies are today. So you look at it and you say, oh my gosh, Tesla has a PE of 100. Well, okay, but where's the earnings going to be in year 3, 4, and 5? And a great example of this was NVIDIA. Before NVIDIA took off, there was a time that the PE, looked expensive, but in hindsight now, 5 years later, you could have bought NVIDIA for about 2 times earnings. 2 times earnings, 5 years hence. And so if you want to, focus on the PE for this year, focus on the PE for last year, focus on the PE for next year if you want to. But the reality is for these exponential companies, you can get some of them at a steal if you focus on year 3, 4, and 5. And if because that's when the exponential really starts to kick in for many of these businesses. And again, NVIDIA is the best example I can think of where you could have bought that stock for a steal, but most people who were stuck in a PE world didn't understand that.
In fact, some of the best investors in the world sold it for a song. SoftBank, they were the largest shareholder, owning 5% of NVIDIA. And they sold it for $3.6 billion. If they just held, and this is why investing is hard, everybody. Sometimes like to, they take some profits off tables. Nothing wrong with that. But sometimes when you are in an exponential asset, just hold on to it. Now that bag is worth $200 billion today. And it's just hilarious to see. Sometimes people shed their winners to buy losers as well. Mando, have you ever seen that happen before? And do you agree with CERN? Exponentiality.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I do agree that just people in general don't really value exponential growth that well. SoftBank's had some great trades, and it also has some of these sort of stories. So, like, I think that's just the nature of SoftBank as an investment. I don't know. Like with AI, I told you I bought Tesla. I have a few other plays, like much smaller, but I find it really difficult to be specific in terms of the stock I want to buy. I'm increasingly getting drawn towards like more indexes of like companies that are all doing the same thing, like the ARK index or several others, because I just find it's difficult to work out like who's going to be the ones who do like the step changes and all this sort of stuff, even though I want to be exposed. And I feel I can get frustrated sometimes by judging one versus the other and thinking it's all going to just putting all of my eggs in one basket when it comes to AI. Because as we just spoke about, like there's the barriers to entry are just about to decrease so much. And I just think it makes it difficult to judge basically one company versus another.
But that's interesting. I'll challenge you on that one, because he or she with the most compute wins is my crude analogy. And guess who has the most compute on the planet? And guess who's already won? The answer is XAI with Elon Musk. They threw, I don't know, $80 billion on GPUs in the last 2 years. CERN, is that correct? And they have now leapfrogged the number one, which is OpenAI ChatGPT. And OpenAI ChatGPT have a market valuation of $350 billion. Therefore, since XAI is better and has more compute and is scaling much faster, they're dedicating 100,000 GPUs just to video processing.
I just can get caught up with that being dangerous. Like, I agree that they've obviously going to be up there in the pack. Do you know what I mean? But like, I just find as though I don't want to bet that. I don't want to bet that this is going to be one, because I find like we can't simultaneously say we think it's going to be an incredibly uncertain world for the next 10 years, and then at the same time say like one company is going to win. I actually think we're going to see immense change. We could see a lot of these tech companies become conglomerates. You know, like Meta could end, like if you have super intelligence, you can go into any industry you want and just create a company, right? So I think we're at this sort of world where with greater uncertainty means that I think hedging your bets for some of these slightly helps.
And Meta, by the way, is the firm that whacked their entire AI team because they failed. Now they're paying $100 million sign-on bonuses that are non-refundable for second-tier AI people. Hilarious. Are they going to make it? I see you laughing there, sir. And that was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment. But here, this is a piece from Mario. The Optimus V3 is amazing per Elon. V2 can already be your butler. So it's a crazy time engine. You know, as Sir and you and I know, and we've experienced, the hard part was the brain for these bots. Now the hard part's the hardware.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have these frontier models. And by the way, that Department of Defense contract was for Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, and XAI for up to 200 million, a ceiling of 200 million each.
Wow.
So pretty significant investment there, or, you know, planning to at least. So that's kind of interesting.
And before you continue, I'm going to interview there because I want to talk about one thing Mando said too, and what you just said about $200 million each. I spoke to a VC last week, and what they're doing right now, because things are changing so fast, they don't know who the winner is going to be in a month. So they're doing a scattershot approach. Yeah. Throw 50K at 100 different players and see what sticks, kind of like Chinese multiple, which I don't think is the clever way to go. But carry on, CERN.
Yeah, so the thing I would say, I think that in evaluating these companies, you want to look at a couple of things. The speed of their innovation is key, and certainly, you know, XAI has outran everybody so far. You know, I'm very impressed, for example, with Google's AI chops. I'm not particularly impressed with their speed, right? So that worries me a little bit. In terms of the robotics space, yes, the AI part's critical, but also the hardware is critical. And then secondarily, later on, as they begin to manufacture these, the manufacturing capability is going to be the gating factor, I think, for these companies. And so right now, as I judge it, at least, and many others, Tesla has, impressive chops on the hardware development front, and they'll have their issues that they'll have to work through. And then they also have impressive chops on the ability to manufacture.
Yep.
And when you look at Meta, when you look at Google and others, you kind of are left wondering how they're going to approach making hundreds of millions of humanoid robots, if not billions. And that's going to be an incredible challenge for even Tesla at that scale.
Yep. In fact, he hopes that Tesla shareholders will be able to vote on Tesla investing in XAI, which would be great. I don't personally want Tesla to own all of XAI, but anyway, we have other little bit of breaking news that I want to talk about too, because this is the key convergence of a couple of assets that we mentioned and proxies. We have a company called MicroStrategy who just broke over 600,000 Bitcoin, which is bonkers to think about. And they have 601,550 Bitcoin now, if I'm not mistaken. And all four gears are spinning. They are raising money by issuing stock and three different preferreds, STRF, STRK, and STRD. Cern, you track MicroStrategy, and your clients are exposed to MicroStrategy. And for me, it's been the trade of the decade. For me, since 2020. Before we go around the circle, walk us through the raise, then talk us about the gain on each purchase. You can see only 1 month is red, and then the yield. Real quick.
Yeah. So this image really is an image that shows the vacuum cleaner that has become MicroStrategy. They have different avenues now to suck up capital, fiat money from different sources, whether it's equity investors, whether it's convertible bond investors, now preferred stock investors, which really touches on the bond market, whether it be investment grade, whether it be high yield. These are all replacements for some of those types of bonds. And so they now have, for the first time this past week, sucked up money from equity investors and sucked up money into three different preferreds for the first time. And so this is the early stages of what I think is going to be a very important development for Bitcoin continuing to suck up a lot of capital. And MicroStrategy has built this bond market vacuum cleaner, and I believe other Bitcoin treasury companies will as well.
And before you move on from there too, Mando, you know the bond market better than anybody. What do you make of all this craziness?
I think it's smart. I've been very happy that they've moved more towards equity financing though, rather than bond financing. I think that's like, that's been the main worry for me with MicroStrategy, and we'll see if that continues to be with like these more like perp or a preferred style issuance. I much prefer that as a long-term capital allocation strategy for MicroStrategy. That's for me, who doesn't own strategy, but for them being a worry for the rest of the market, I think they need to keep debt low, and they are increasingly.
Yeah. Well, and also the asset price is rising. This is the gain loss in each purchase. Obviously, I love these charts, Cern. Thank you for hammering them together.
It's just a beautiful image of a dollar cost averaging strategy working over time. And certainly there are periods of time where there were a lot of red bars on this chart, but you keep executing the strategy on an asset that you believe in. And eventually, you get to the point where we are today, Bitcoin at all-time highs, and every single purchase that you made is at a profit. Now, the one little red bar there is an actual sale that they made, I think 704 Bitcoin at one point, but that looks red because the price is higher now than where they sold it at. So that was a virtual loss essentially, but every single purchase they've made has now been positive. And you can see the gains. So there's one purchase there where they've gained $3 billion on that one single purchase. Yep. Some of the early purchases.
DCA, people. That's why the show is called DCA too, coincidentally. And the yield, they originally had a plan for 15%, increasing their bag by 15% in 2025. Now the new plan's 25%, and they're already above 20%. Are they going to make another 5% in the next 6 months? The answer is hell yes, because they have all the avenues, as you mentioned, to vacuum up Bitcoin. This is nuts. As a CTO, what do you make of this craziness? And by the way, when you add up the amount of IBIT bought by BlackRock, representing pension funds, etc., which are going into high gear right now, BlackRock had $2 billion days last week, I think, almost. or in the last 2 weeks. And then you add in what MicroStrategy is buying. They've bought the next 7 years of supply between those two players. It's unheard of. It's a different era. What do you think, CTO?
Yeah, so if I can share the chart, I think I can offer one perspective. I cannot meaningfully contribute any insight about MicroStrategy that James and Søren you can't bring. But I think one interesting perspective, we talked about this before, like NVIDIA, and many people tried to use PE ratio to value exponential disruptive technologies, and it just doesn't work. Like, we don't have to go back that far. This is what is 15 years ago. Share price was 0.1 something. Now it's 164. So that's 1,000 times. You can't sit here with some PE ratio and try to calculate what price of this would be in the future. It just doesn't work. It's a flawed valuation model. And I think that even though this has been proven so clearly for all technologies since the beginning, I think people are again trying the same thing. Like, how much is a Bitcoin really worth? How can it be worth over $100,000? Or what should MicroStrategy be worth based on PE ratio or something? It doesn't work for technology. That is my conclusion after studying this for a long time. I feel that a better mental model is instead to look at possibilities. Like, could this realistically succeed? If not, okay, then buy. But if there is a real possibility that this could make it, it's usually better just follow the trend, because the winner tends to keep winning. It's an unfair world in the exponential digital space where the winner has a tendency to keep winning much longer than anyone can imagine. And we saw it with NVIDIA through all the different phases and whatnot. And looking at, say, MicroStrategy that you asked about now, they've kept winning for a long time. And the winner tends to keep winning. And I feel that that's a better mental model to look at than what I think a lot of traditional firms now, they're scratching their head. They can't quite figure out how to value Bitcoin and MicroStrategy. But from statistics, the winner tends to keep winning.
They've been scratching their heads for 5 years. It's hilarious watching them scratch their heads for 5 years, not understanding what I call the infinite money glitch. We try to keep this to an hour, very respectful for everybody taking their time to be here. People love this angle of the show. Links below for everybody if you're watching on my channel. I'm going to finish with one, again, convergence topic. All right, this just came out a few hours ago. The replacement rate is 1.9. You can see Europe is very, very low when it comes to fertility, unless, of course, they open their borders. We're not going to go there. But either Europe starts having large families or it will keep dying. This is a problem we see across the planet. People are not having enough children. And is it the perfect time for robots? But, with all the stuff we spoke about regarding trying to predict what's going to happen in the future, this is ominous. People have been raising alarm bells on this. Some people believe there are government organizations that this is by design. They're finding ways to keep fertility down because they're afraid of maybe global warming or something. Quick round the table. Mando, is this craziness? Is this FUD? Or is this something that we should care about? Not having enough kids.
Yes, it's a Europe thing. It's parts of Asia thing. Look, I do think it's a worry for certain regions of the world, particularly because migration, which has been the other solve for this, has led to like a lot of social unrest in a lot of different countries. So it's something that I worry about. As Europe, obviously, it's also been like a low growth area, and they're not at the forefront of many of the newer technologies. Like at least when Japan faced this issue, it became the number one country in the world for robotics for many years, and kind of tried to deal with it that way. And if there aren't that many AI companies leading the charge in Europe, or robotics companies, or any bleeding edge technology for that matter, apart from some in healthcare. So it is a big worry, I think, in Europe.
Awesome. Søren, over to you. fertility globally. I remember I used to spend a lot of time in Milan in the early 90s. And I noticed kind of people my age group, they weren't getting married. They weren't having kids. They just wanted to party all the time. And I thought it was just Milan specific. But now we see 35 years later, no, it was a thing.
Yeah, there's been a long-term trend, I think, throughout human history that the wealthier you get, the less kids you have. Particularly, maybe 100 years ago, we had a lot of kids because there was a lot of infant mortality. So you just needed to have more kids because you just never knew how many would survive. I will share Mando's concerns. I would strike maybe an optimistic note, and maybe this is more hope than anything right now, but I'm hoping that as we have particularly humanoid robots that take over the difficult tasks that humans do, labor tasks, including helping to raise children, that people may choose in a world of abundance to have more kids because taking care of them will have never be easier.
Yeah.
Now, again, that may be more hope than reality. It may be the reality that if we have robots doing everything for us, that people just sit around the pool and drink all day and don't have any kids. That would be a worry for me if we have that kind of a world. But hopefully, humanoid robots can help address some of this issue.
Okay, Mr. Digitalis, how do you see all this playing out?
Yeah, so I have 4 kids, and it's the best thing I've done in my life. So everyone watching, if you have the ability, have children. It's the best thing in the world, and it's frustrating to see this playing out. I think it's a social issue, and I hope that it will change. But it's not good. I think like the well-educated society it's not having children. I think it's a mistake. We're going to create social problems, and come on, guys. If anyone needs help how to do it, hit me up and I'll make a video.
Make a video. Oh my god. Well, it's funny because I do remember this point here from Digital Collectibles. In Italy in the early 90s, the salaries weren't that high and people struggled to pay rent. They couldn't afford cars or anything else, but they liked to dress well and they liked to go out at the weekends. And that gobbled up all the money to even think about having a family. So this is very valid. People don't have enough money and they know that kids are expensive. I want to thank everybody for a banger of a show. Different flavor today, not as much hardcore crypto, much more hardcore about getting ready for the next 5 years because everything is colliding. And that's the big story. Any final thoughts before I let you all go, Mando?
No, let's see how long we can stay in this all-time high region. I would agree with what CTO said, is that generally when I break through all-time high, I stay away from leverage, stay away from get rich quick trades. It's a time to kind of sit on your bags that you hopefully have picked up on, and think about not maybe strategic exits, but moving more into Bitcoin as we go higher and higher and higher.
Interesting. Søren, final wrapping thoughts from you, and thank you again for joining us on this crazy show.
Yeah, I would say, as an investment advisor now for the last 30 years, I think what we're coming into over the next 5 or 10 years is going to be so profound and so life-changing, world-changing, that it's exciting, but also I would urge caution. You really have to be aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. There's going to be some investments that have phenomenal results, and there are going to be other investments that just perform so horribly that you'll be shocked. So just be very careful out there.
Yeah, awesome. CTO?
Bitcoin all-time high.
Got the
fantastic.
Yeah.
That's my closing thoughts.
Yeah, and everything mean reverts. I mean, if you look at the past 2 weeks, we went from 100K to 123.8 or something crazy like that. It will be choppy, and that's what happens. So expect some chop over the next week. But remember, Q4 is when things really kick off, and we still have rate cuts coming. We have more money printing coming. We've got catch-up coming. We've got, as Søren said, the RIAs are coming. They're beginning to deploy. It's a good setup still. I am not hitting the bearish button yet. Still bullish. Thank you all for coming. Have a great week. Be safe out there, everybody. And don't forget links below for this brilliant team of the best people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.